Yeah, so my name is Sami Hiro. So I am the newish CEO to Ellie.ai. So I started in November, but I have a pretty long career in analytics and data warehousing, dating back to at least to '98 when we launched one of the ETL startups that I was with, and I've been in and out of data analytics ever since. And then we have Hannu, who is one of the co-founders, one of the two co-founders of Ellie, uh, who is our chief modeler and trainer, and he's developed some awesome theories about modeling and how to do things better. And then we have Andrew, who's based out of the US. And Andrew and I have worked on and off together a couple of times, and in big enterprises, and then a little bit smaller. And then Johnny from Northern England, I should say, or UK. Maybe if you guys could just spend a minute or two to introduce yourself and what your specialties are, and then I can start hammering you with questions from there on.
After you, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Andrew Ellison, currently the head of North America data for Cloud9. We are a boutique consulting firm that helps organizations undergo their data and AI transformation and get them ready for using their data. Been working with data for about 15 years, both in the industry side as well as last 8 years in consulting side. Kind of consider myself a jack of all trades. I've worked across a lot of different industries and a lot of different areas of the data pipeline, upstream and downstream. So looking forward to the conversation and happy to be here.
Cool. My name is Johnny Winter. I'm a data and analytics consultant currently working for a company called Advancing Analytics. This could end up sounding very similar to what Andrew just said. So we're also a boutique consultancy who do all the things that Andrew said. So yeah, we're a Databricks and a Microsoft partner. We specialize in sort of data platform implementations using those technologies. We have a data engineering practice where they kind of build out the platforms and do all the ingestion. We have an AI team who do lots of really, really clever things that I don't entirely understand. I can't even spell LLM. And I actually work in our analytics practice. So where the team I work in come in is once our engineers have built a platform and done all that data ingestion, we get involved in terms of trying to turn that into something useful for the end users. So we take care of the modeling and then potentially right the way through to the sort of analytics and business intelligence and dashboarding and things like that as well. So our analytics team, we say our mission is to design and build data products that bring value to the business.
Right, and I'm Hannu, and as Sami already said, I'm one of the co-founders of Ellie. And about my background, I usually say that even though I have studied engineering and technology, so I'm analyst and mathematician first, business second, and technology third. And the reason actually why I am in this space is that in the very early in my career, I was engaged in mathematical modeling. I worked with what is nowadays called prescriptive analytics, working on decision support systems for telecom pricing and such. And the thing there is that when I decided to get back to my roots some 10 plus years ago, I was looking for my spot in the data and analytics space, and just by sheer luck, I happened to meet the #1 data modeler in Finland, Ari Hovi, and I noticed that actually data modeling is the missing tool, the missing general purpose tool that you can use to model basically any problem in the world. And the additional benefit of data modeling is that it also has a direct link to actually implementing the data solution that can solve the problem quantitatively. So that's my background, and I've been with Ellie since the beginning, meaning year 2018.
Very cool, very cool. So actually, I was talking to the Gartner analyst the other day, and one of the things we see them quote a lot is that 80% of the data product related projects fail. What do you guys think? Do you think that's over exaggeration, that 80% fail or fail to meet expectations, or do you think that's roughly right? And And why do you think that is?
It's quite a often quoted statistic, I think. I think if it's truly a data product implementation, if you're truly following product thinking, I think that's probably the type of project that are actually more likely to succeed, to be honest. So I'd be interested to know whether or not of those 80% that are deemed to have failed, whether or not are they really doing data products, or are they just, throwing out a bunch of analysis and dashboarding for dashboarding's sake. So yeah, I guess for me, I'd probably sort of want to sort of talk about, are they really sort of applying those product thinking, looking to identify the value and usability and feasibility and all these things, and applying those principles to it.
Yeah, that's probably a good point, is that sometimes it might be that a failure is also failing to meet expectations. But Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, 80% is a pretty high number. And like Johnny said, it depends on what they're considering a data product. I think a lot of times organizations, they try to put something out, or if it's a proof of concept that they think has value, in instances, they are able to prove it out, but not able to scale it appropriately. So I do think that is one of the challenges organizations can see in terms of they're able to create small scale things, but in terms of scaling it to enterprise levels, I think that continues to be a challenge for some organizations.
That's actually a really good point. I might actually not let Hannu, in fact, answer this question quite yet, because I think there is an element here is when you have an enterprise data product or something quite large. Enterprises are obviously, in today's world, they're super interconnected, they're super global, bunch of different divisions and so forth. Hannu and I, we've been talking recently about the concept of how to eat an elephant.
Yeah.
How about maybe you should touch a little bit about that, because that might bring some root causes why things fail or fail to meet expectations.
Yeah.
Before I go there, so maybe I just briefly answer to the original question.
Yeah, sure.
Since what I have seen, so I would say that technically they don't fail probably that often. But what I see there, that many of the data products that we've been created, they are not really used. So for instance, when I created something myself, and I had this kind of habit of asking of how often it has been used, what did you use it for? And it was only a fraction of the things that I developed that were really used. And that's one part of the thing. So for one reason or the other, they don't meet the expectations if they are not used. And I consider it as a failure. But then to what you asked, Sami, there. So the thing there is that what I've seen in some cases when there are very, very talented people working on large problems. So I once had the privilege of working with a team of many of them professors, and they were doctors in areas where combining machine learning and healthcare. And the thing there is that even with this kind of very talented group of people, the problems they were dealing with are so damn difficult. Those narrow problems they were dealing with are so difficult that all their cognitive capacity, which was very, very high, was consumed with the small, narrow problems. And the thing there is that when it comes to drug development, which was the topic of the day, so they didn't know what the other guy was doing, what the other person, the other professional next to them was doing. And the thing there is that they said that even in large organizations, we deal with partial optimization. Very talented people working on partial optimization, but no one is in charge of the big picture, how to connect those pieces together.
Yeah, that's very true. And sometimes when you deal with these hugely complex problems, you get maybe stuck with too little details immediately, rather than try to like interactively or iteratively break it into smaller pieces and try to keep the connections going, right?
Yeah, and it is something that I can cover now or then later, but actually just yesterday, I was workshopping with a customer that is working on a hugely complex and large problem. And the thing there is that the question was that, can we model everything? No, we can't. So can we ask every time if our model should contain this or this entity? We cannot ask for each entity there. So we have to have a prioritization strategy. We have to have focus and prioritization. And the only way to do it is that you have to have some kind of layered approach. You ask from the big picture, what are the most important things here? You break it into smaller pieces and then deal with each piece at a time and ask the same questions. What are the most important things in this part? And then you break it into smaller and smaller pieces. And if you have a strategy, and actually there is such a strategy, if you have a strategy to put those pieces together, you have a way to build even a model for dealing with the climate change, if you believe in that. I do.
Mm-hmm. Which obviously requires a little bit of patience and time. So Andrew, you've been working in the US and we've been working together. And I think I was one of those annoying business executives once upon a time where time was of essence, right? So how do you see, like, this is obviously the ideal model is that you take the time, but how often does that actually happen? Like you've seen now tons of different kinds of projects. Do we have enough time to do it right?
I think it happens quite frequently, and I think that's one of the challenges to being able to, solve these complex problems down the line. Is a lot of organizations, they're trying to move very, very quickly, and they're trying to get things out the door very, very quickly, and ultimately, the business decision makers a lot of times push for solutions that might not be technically sound. So, in that instance, you incur tech debt, and even if it's a small amount of technical debt, that technical debt starts to accrue over time. And then, when you do want to go and something like ChatGPT comes and changes the paradigm and everyone scrambles to build out a Gen AI model, you realize that your platform, the cracks start to become a little more pronounced in that platform. So I think that's definitely one of the challenges in terms of being ready and able to scale and able to kind of build out those data products and those next level data products, is the ability to take a step back and say, do we want to do this right now and incur a lot of pain down the line, or do we want to do it right? And I think it's important to, a lot of times, the purse holders aren't necessarily the tech savvy people. So I think it's important to speak their language and work with them to understand, hey, we can do this right now, but in a few years, it's going to cost us even more money, or the failures, because we have an unstable pipeline, that it's going to end up costing more money to maintain this pipeline and fix it, or we can do it right, take a little bit more time, but it'll pay dividends down the line.
So
how do you see, Giovanni, I was going to ask exactly your perspective as well, and this kind of push and pull between the business and IT or purse holders. So
I mean, that idea of sort of taking the time, the phrase I used recently in a meeting with some stakeholders, it's actually a weightlifting phrase that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So even though, if you take the time and are more considered, you might feel like you're going slower, but ultimately you do end up actually doing it better. And ultimately that saves you time and you can end up getting there quicker. I think quite often, again, sort of going back to that phrase in terms of how do you eat an elephant and, one bite at a time, I think trying to do too much too soon can quite often be the problem. There's an interesting, I mean, I don't know if people will run away if I start mentioning the word agile, but I mean, there was an interesting exercise I did as part of an agile workshop recently where it was sort of taking 3 tasks, which was to list the numbers 1 to 10 in one column, the letters A to J in the next, and then the Roman numerals I to X in the third column. And if you try and do a row at a time, so if you do 1 and then A and then I and then 2 and then B and then I, versus just going 1 to 10, A to J, I to X, it's the same amount of work, but if you just concentrate on one thing at a time, you get the whole thing done far quicker, and also you deliver that value quicker. If you consider doing the first task of doing 1 to 10 as a completed piece of work that your business might value from, you do get there faster in the end. So I think there's sometimes it can be counterintuitive that to deliver quickly means to try and do everything all at once. And in actual fact,
Yeah.
just sort of going back to, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Sometimes that can be a better approach.
That's a really good point, because I think I remember back when Andrew and I we were building pretty large data warehouse with AWS Redshift, and we rushed a few things, and then you build some things at great expense, and then you're like, oh shit. So those oh shit moments, and then you have to go and redo a bunch of things because we didn't necessarily model things quite right from the beginning. Even though we were running kind of a shadow IT organization, we didn't have to battle with a central IT. We just did stuff out of operations. But yeah, mistakes happen everywhere, I guess. So what do you think is like, because we see often that there's some level of lost in translation when business people and IT try to get an agreement on scope and requirements and things like that. So Johnny, maybe you start. It's like, do you see that happen a lot, and how could we do things better to make sure that we have a common understanding?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways that I see it happening, to be honest. I think quite often, and I've been this person as well, is that the person on the data team thinks they know more than they do. So there's almost this assumption that they understand what the data looks like, and therefore they understand how to solve the business person's problem. And there can be sometimes a bit of hubris in terms of sort of, right, I know what's best for them, and then ultimately it isn't. So that kind of loss in translation sometimes happens from that perspective. I think there's a common trope that data teams will complain that their business users aren't data literate enough. And then the nice sort of soundbite that seems to be doing their own rounds on LinkedIn at the moment is that actually data teams need to try and make themselves more business literate. So I think, again, one of the things that I've been sort of quite fascinated with in the last year or so, coming out of the Degani book on data mesh and sort of domain-driven design. Domain-driven design is very much about relying on your business users' expertise, really bring them on the journey, get them involved, make sure that they have some skin in the game in terms of driving forward what the solutions need to look like. And, if you involve them, you'll be surprised how much you can learn from them. And just keep those dialogues going, keep talking to each other. Again, another cheesy soundbite. I think it was a guy called Wayne Eckerson talked about building relationships, not requirements. So, it shouldn't just be a case of, oh, I need a new data product. Great, fill out the form and I'll go and build it. It's spend some time together, get in a room, talk things through, make sure that you're sort of both talking in common language.
That is very true. And Wayne and I go way back. And Hanuk calls us the graybeards, which is I guess I should say Wayne has already done that to make sure it's not happening. But Andrew, what about you? So I think you've seen a fair share of these kind of cross ownerships and communications challenges, and sometimes maybe even driving costs up on platforms.
Yeah, I mean, Johnny must have gotten an advanced copy of my notes over here because I agree. I agree pretty much spot on. I do think it's important. Data literate or data fluency. I think especially now, organizations you can't just be a business person. I think you have to have some level of technical and data fluency to be able to understand the complexities for a few reasons. One, to understand the complexities and be able to speak with the data individuals about true scope creep, what an MVP is. Johnny mentioned in terms of agile development, whether you love it, whether you hate it, I do think it is important to define out what is that minimum viable product so you can deliver incremental growth. And then to his point as well, I do think it's important that the data developers, whether they're the data engineers, whether the data scientists, they're not working in a strictly academic sense, and they have a good understanding of the business, whether that's to a federated model where they're embedded with the business. I do think it is important, that they can't just be strictly centralized coding in a dark, in a dark room anymore. I think it's important that they get out there and they're participating in the business. They understand and make sure that, things are aligned to the data strategy. And I think it comes from the top down as well to make sure that overall company strategy is well defined, that it is, defined to the data tasks at hand and building those things out. And I also think from going back to the business side, increased data fluency, data literacy kind of helps to solve some of those bottlenecks that you see if you're able to build out self-service tools and you're able to build out self-service capabilities and start putting simpler tasks for into the hands of the users and be able to give them access to the data, whether it's through a data product, a predictive model, but things that they need versus having to go to IT. I think it opens or data teams. I think it opens up the doors a little bit more for data teams to work on some more complex problems for them.
Do you think there is a risk when the business user, so to speak? So oftentimes analytics sits in finance, right? And do you think there is a risk that as those users become more data literate in a sense, and they get access to these fancy new tools that make it super simple for them to do their own data preparation and their own things, that they start to creating all kinds of new versions of the truth by themselves and potentially create havoc, kind of upstream, if you wish, when it comes to data?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a risk in terms of how much of the, how long a leash you want to give to your end users in terms of what they're able to do. And I think that's why you figure out who are your true power users. And there's different personas that are going to want to work at different levels. And that's kind of what you have to determine in terms of those personas and the level of access they get. I think, I'm talking about a perfect world where perfect budgets exist and you can implement like a robust data governance program to make sure that, you have a single source of truth, you have a metrics layer or a semantic model that everyone's pulling something similar from. If I'm saying net revenue is A plus B equals C, someone else doesn't come and say it's actually, X plus Y equals Z, making sure they're speaking the same language. And I think also something that might get lost in terms of the data product and the build aspect of it, and we touched on a little bit, is what I call the glue. And the glue is kind of the process governance in terms of how do you actually access things, what are the guardrails that need to be in place to make sure that users don't go too far off the reservation, but still have the ability to innovate and, before it goes to production or be made, used in enterprise decisions, goes through some sort of governance process to make sure that it's a usable data product.
Yeah, it's the perfect world. Hannu, how many times you've seen Perfect World?
Never. I probably never will. But there is something that Johnny said there before about the lost in translation that really resonated with me, and it is that we data people, we think that we are very welcoming to the business. We have learned over the years to say that we are business driven. We engage the business people, and especially me being involved in data modeling, we always said that we are building data warehouses. We have a business-driven way to build data warehouses because we start with modeling. We interview the business people. We have workshops with them. They actually define what we are developing. But that is not enough, because usually what I saw that what we did there is that, yes, we engaged those people. They came to our workshops and they told their experience, but they didn't know at all what we were doing. They were just giving us information. We were modeling. We didn't explain to them what it has to do with what we are actually trying to achieve. So we claim to be business-driven, business engaging, but the thing there is that we force the business people to come to our realm, play with our terms and so on. And let's say in an organization, it is not only the business roles, but the analysts. And by analyst, I don't mean our own bubble, meaning that the data analytics people. There are analytic profiles like product managers, business controllers, strategy professionals, and so on. They are analysts, but not in our terms. So we have to somehow engage them in their terms. And it means that, just as Johnny said, business has to be more data literate, but we have to be business literate. That's one thing that we have to learn. But then when it comes to the lost in translation thing, there is another thing that I'd like to mention here. And very often in my modeling trainings, I say that, let's say that the four of us, Sami and us three panelists, I don't know about you if you have ever built a house. I haven't. I have built a small summer cottage, but that's it. But I would say that if we decided to build something together, we would be able to do something because we have a common perception of what a house looks like. It has a foundation, it has walls, it has a roof, it has windows and doors. So even if we didn't really prepare any blueprints, even if we didn't know anything beforehand, so we would just decide to divide the responsibilities. Johnny take care of the foundation, I take care of the walls. We could do something. But then what is the difficult thing there with data? Everything is so damn abstract. And when we have abstract things, we don't have a common perception what they are. And our vocabulary, and I'm not now referring to my me being Finnish and talking in a foreign language, but our vocabulary is so limited. So it is only a fraction of what we understand that we can say in words. So when there is a very talented business professional, very talented data professional, and they both understand perfectly their domain, but then they try to communicate with this very narrow bandwidth, which is the spoken language. It is just impossible in many cases when you have words only for abstract things, for which you don't have words. So then it comes to one of my favorite topics, which is the modeling. So it is two things that help there. We need to have examples for abstract things. We need to concretize them through examples, and then we have to visualize it. It doesn't need to be a data model, but somehow we have to visualize what the complex things are that we are working on. We wouldn't build a house without a blueprint, but we tend to build data products without blueprints.
So I'll have maybe a little funny story. So when I moved to Finland about 7 years ago, and I bought this house from 70s, and we started Fast and Furious renovation on it. And I can tell you that many of the things were done a little bit like the Gen Z DBT data engineers. They were like, let's do first, and then we'll figure out the drawings later. And that obviously created a lot of challenges in getting the permits after the fact, because the guys were like, oh shit, where do the pipes actually go, and things like that. And we're seeing that. I don't know, Johnny, are you seeing a little bit of that as well? It's the Fast and Furious, let's just get a ticket done, we'll fill the need and move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
To analytics, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And it's people end up painting themselves into a bit of a corner because, as you say, it's just move on to the next thing as opposed to having that big picture. There's always a balance, at the end of the day, the business want results, the business want answers. Sometimes you have to take that approach, but if you can be a bit more considered. I like what Hannu was saying previously about this idea that you need to have that bigger picture, but then start to sort of really, really break it down. So we have this idea. What do we call it? We call it the value distillation funnel, which, I'm sure we should probably think of something a bit more catchy. But that's the same thing. We sort of start from a very, very wide view of the world and then sort of just go down. You can imagine, it's a funnel. So we start very wide at the top and then we get down to the, that bite-sized chunk that we hope delivers the value and go from there and then iterate from there as well. But yeah, some people start at the little thing sometimes too often.
How much, I know I'm putting you, Johnny, in a tough spot, but if you think about the overall time to value, when you said, slow is fast in a way, it's that if you do things properly and you have a good engagement with the business people and good common understanding, how much time would you say that you're actually saving in the total time to value when you go from kind of data prep all the way into delivering analytics?
I mean, that is definitely the classic piece of string. I think the consultant in me just wants to say it depends.
How long is the river? I like to ask as well. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing for me as well is that in terms of doing a small chunk, so when we talked about the 80% that fail and this idea that people want everything, I think part of those failures are the fact that people wait for the everything before they sort of say, well, it was wrong. Whereas if you start with the 5%, if the 5%'s wrong, you iterate until the 5%'s right and then move on. And I think overall that's how much I couldn't say, but I'm sure it's magnitudes in terms of how much quicker overall it's gonna save you. So that kind of fail fast mentality, I think, I guess maybe the 80% of projects that fail are because they failed fast. Who knows? But that's yeah, get out there and try and get the value there quick, and then fail fast and iterate. I think would be where I'd say, and then we'll never find out how much time it saved because we'll work more effectively.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, Andrew, I don't know, it's tough to say, but I know in the US, a lot of companies like to outsource a lot of the IT work, particularly, and I know some consulting companies are making a ton of money in building analytics projects like EXL or others. Let's not mention the others. EXL is public, but so that drives a lot of cost for companies, obviously. So how do you think, balancing that cost benefit in a sense and the time to value?
Yeah, I think it's important to drive that iterative value, especially a lot of data. Data can be expensive. It takes up a big chunk of a lot of budget. So I do think it is important to show that value, especially, and I think it's also important to be transparent in terms of what you're actually doing. I think sometimes, you'll start a project and then you'll go away, and occasionally there will be a status report saying what's going on in the project, but that status report will have a bunch of lines that have dates that are missed, and people say, well, what the heck? I was expecting it now, but now it's saying this. So I do think it's very important to be able to show the value early and often and get those quick wins, because I do think, one, it gives you a little bit more leeway and a little bit more, it helps to start building that trust. And then I agree with Johnny in terms of don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I think it's important to make sure that if you do have that 95%, you're able to get that out. I do think it's important to make sure that this is where the collaboration between the business and the data teams is really important, to be able to articulate, okay, what is that priority? It shouldn't really be the data teams articulating, hey, we should focus on this feature. It should be the business that's focusing on, hey, we really, really want this feature, and the data team saying, okay, yes, we can do it in X number of sprints, or hey, here's some of the blockers to that, to make sure you can get to that core group of features that you really want to get out, that are going to drive business value as they, in terms of priority, in terms of importance, and that there's no surprises in terms of what's happening. I think that's really key for that collaboration, to make sure that there's no surprises, that you have, there's not an abstraction layer between what's happening for the data team and what's going, what the business is expecting. So making sure it's very transparent, I think, is key.
That's very, very interesting. And you mentioned earlier, Andrew, about the data governance, and I know you work a lot in data governance and data strategy. How do you see the kind of the high level modeling, or even the detailed modeling, and the data governance work together? And also, if you can touch a little bit about, who's the actual user of the data governance platforms, because I know they've been kind of sold a little bit. It's like they should be in every desktop, but that might not be the actual reality.
Yeah, I think data modeling is a key part of data governance for a few reasons. One, it is your source of truth, right? In terms of what connects to what. I think it's also important from a data lineage perspective. A lot of users want to understand, where's that data coming from? And I think the ability to model the data and then be able to see how that model was created, and see what were the source systems, what were the calculations that go into that, especially from an onboarding perspective. If you have new people that are coming into the business, you want to get them up to speed and productive as fast as possible. I think having common data models, and that can be kind of looked at and understood and help to onboard those people, it increases productivity and gets them using the data faster than not having a data model, or having multiple data models floating around there. So I think that centralized platform is good. In terms of the actual governance tools, there's a lot out there. I do think data stewardship is very important. I think it takes a village in terms of data or in terms of data governance. It's not something the data team should be dictating. There's a couple different, models, from a centralized data governance model where it is a data governance team that basically says, here's your KPI, this is what it means, versus federated where different teams kind of control it. So you kind of have to find that happy medium in the middle. But I do think it's important that users understand why it's good governance is important, why the data modeling is important. They understand what goes into it, and they understand, the process of which you can make requests or make changes to that. And, without very big on no surprises. So, you don't want those surprises down the line. And I think that's where data governance comes into play in terms of involving the business in it.
Do the business users actually use the data governance tools, or is it kind of like, okay, so
No, they do. That's kind of, so again, in a perfect world, a lot of times that your initial users of data governance tools are most likely going to be your data teams, right? Because if you're curating data sets, or you're setting it up and you're curating data sets, a lot of times the data teams are going to know what that data is. But frankly, data owners, they're going to sit in the business a lot of times. They're going to be system owners. They're going to be ERP system owners. And they're going to know the data better than a data engineer who's responsible for ingesting the data into a data lake or a data platform. So at the end of the day, you do want to start, as you mature, getting those users in there and maintaining your catalogs, maintaining your lineage. And that is the ultimate goal for those tools. Again, I live in my head, it's a perfect world, but that doesn't always happen. So I think it's important at least that, and it goes back to what we were talking about, that the data teams have a good understanding of the business so that they can understand what the data is used for, catalog it appropriately, maintain that source of truth for the organization.
Got it. I would imagine that part of the value, and Johnny, you tell me maybe as well, is that part of the value of these data governance tools also is to figure out who owns certain data sets to start with, and you can go and ask if you have questions, right?
Yeah, totally. Sometimes to find out which ones don't have owners, that's one of the things I've found as well. Yeah, no, I mean, having it documented, as you say, when you talked about the sort of Gen Z DBT modelers,
I didn't mean it the bad way, right?
But you can. I mean, DBT's got quite a good documentation and lineage built into it to an extent, to be honest. But like, still, it's sometimes quite a bit to unpick versus having sort of a more a better governed model, I guess, in terms of making sure everyone's on the same page in terms of where's that stored and how things are done. But yeah, like stewardship and making sure that you've got somebody who's taking ownership for, like, to an extent, for me, that's sort of definition, in terms of, like, we talked about sort of semantic layers and sort of the ideas of metric stores, and somebody who owns, what is the definition of profit, I think is important. But also from that almost the data quality aspect as well, in terms of actually this data that we're getting from this place, we're finding lots of problems with it. Who can we feed that back to and hopefully drive that feedback loop to make things better?
Yeah. It's I have firsthand experience on that kind of things, on definitions and filters and things like that, where I would sit in a management meeting and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollar business, and then we are bringing different figures into the table, because depending on how people pull the data or where did they pull the data, did it come from the source system, from an ERP, or did it come from an analytics, or did it come from Salesforce, and so forth and so forth. So those are very uncomfortable conversations, and usually very expensive meeting leads into nothing but confusion.
Absolutely.
Very, very good. So let's touch a little bit about the just, some of you already mentioned, like Gen AI and other things. Is that, how do you guys see AI starting to impact, like, your business essentially, and what you do with people? Like, I've run into scenarios where the CEO just says, hey, we need some AI, and everybody's like, okay, what do you mean exactly? But it's now obviously we're a little bit clearer what we can do, but how is it impacting, like, Andrew, like, your life, in terms of data governance and related things? Is it changing a lot of things or making things a little bit easier, or not at all?
In certain instances, it makes it easier. In certain instances, I think so everyone's trying to jump onto the Gen AI train, and I think there's a lot of value with Gen AI. I think a lot of organizations are trying to fit a square peg into a round hole with co-pilots, and everything has a co-pilot these days. But honestly, I've been using certain co-pilots, and I find them to be pretty good in terms of productivity. I think they definitely increase from a sanity check is what's going on with this code. I think they're very helpful. I think one of the things organizations need to consider in terms of their Gen AI readiness and their ability to execute is what does their data foundation look like? And it kind of goes back to the concept of technical debt and how much technical debt do they have? Because ultimately Gen AI and all AI is going to be fed on good data. So I do think it's important where some of these organizations, they're starting to find out that their pipelines might not be as robust as they thought, or they don't have as much data as they thought in a spot where they need it to be able to do the train their LLMs and be able to take advantage of Gen AI. So I do think there's a big opportunity there. In terms of if there's a gold rush, you want to be the person selling shovels a lot of times. So I think the ability to make sure the data is in a really good spot lends itself to being able to do the Gen AI use cases and not be part of that 80% that fails, but actually be part of that 20% that takes it to the next level.
Yeah, I think for me, so the interesting realization I had recently is a lot of the kind of best practices that I've espoused for several years. So I would have always talked about making sure that you've got a good, nice common data model that's well understood. Make sure you're supplementing that with good metadata so that you're giving good descriptions of things like your columns and your tables and your definitions, and take advantage of things like data catalogs to make sure you've got all of this nicely documented. And 4 or 5 years ago, that was too much hard work for everybody. But now, because Gen AI benefits from those things, everyone's racing to do them. It's kind of almost this, when it was making life easier for human beings to work with the data, people weren't so keen. But now with the Gen AI gold rush, it's a case of actually people do want to start taking these things more seriously. So from that perspective, it's had a really positive impact personally for me, because that's the type of work that I enjoy doing. So yeah.
Yeah, Hannu, maybe you can cover a little bit about just what we've been doing with the AI as well, because I think it ties nicely into what John said.
Yeah, actually, if I may, I would start, because when you asked the question, I listed 3 areas, and so in a little bit higher level before I go to what we have worked on recently. The one thing there is that I earlier mentioned that one of the things there is that what is one of the blockers to value there is that an individual can work very, very effectively on his or her own, but then the problem is that when 2 people collaborate, and we have the very limited bandwidth that we can express in words, and especially when it is about abstract things, so we tend to misunderstand each other. And the thing there is that where LLM and where the Gen AI is very, very good already now is that it captures the nuances of words and sentences and so on. So it is already much better than basically anybody in expressing the nuances of meanings in sentences. That's what I use always. For instance, there in describing descriptions for business entities and so on. And it is something that we already have in our prototypes. I will get back to it later. That's one area. AI is much better than humans in expressing things in sentences. That's one thing. The second thing there is that basically with AI, any kind of Gen AI, so what happens there is under the hood is actually that it changes basically anything to numbers. It changes anything to vectors, vectors of numbers. And what it means there is that this far we have been able to store in our data structure, only things that are structured. Basically, everything is structured. So the thing there is that because we are in early stages of AI, for now it is that we see the end results, something that the chatbot generates, something we see in ChatGPT and so on. But the thing there is that under the hood, it generates just vectors that we can store and we can reuse them as we can reuse any data asset. And the third thing there, when it comes to AI, and it is not about what it enables, that what we have to take into account, that AI has its limits with the scope. So there is what is said, the length of the token. So how much information it can carry there. It grows very, very fast, but it is, and it will remain limited. So once again, it gets back to what we discussed before, that even when we use AI, we have to have a strategy where we split large problem into smaller pieces and smaller pieces. And if we can do it, AI can do a very, very good job on dealing with the small problems, but we put them together. And even though the power, it becomes powerful by the minute, it still will be limited in the future. So that's about the foundations there. And what we have done, so it comes back to my point number one. So we have a very well working concept where AI is actually able to draw very, very good data models out of written text. We also have a 2-day hackathon where our guys developed a very nice bot who was able to explain the models in business terms. They were able to explain what this model says us so that a business person can understand what the data is about. Also something that we already have, and it comes to what I said there, point number one, that AI is very good in capturing the meaning of something. And as you know, very, very often, the devil's in the details. We have these 5 tables. They all seem to be about sales transactions. How is this table A different than table B? What is the granularity of this table? What is the grain of this table? What exactly does one record in table mean? And AI is very, very good, first of all, to understanding what the grain is, and secondly, to explain it to us so that the humans can understand it. And that is something that what we are working on, since we data people deal with, if it's SAP, more than 100,000 tables. So we would need to have some tools there to understand a bit better what this particular table is about and how to find the right table among these 100,000. And then what else? Basically combining this kind of thing. So coming back to what we have discussed here. So what is there that why we are not able to solve the complicated business problems? It always comes back to the communication, the human-computer interface, the business IT interface, and so on. And AT is very, very powerful in bridging that gap.
That's really interesting. Every time we talk about AI getting smarter and smarter, I'm thinking about Skynet or HAL 9000, right? I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that type of thing. Yeah, it's would be an interesting answer to a CFO. It's like when they're trying to ask a silly question from their analytics platform, just say no, that's not the right question. So we have a couple more minutes. So so maybe Andrew and Johnny, maybe let's talk a little bit more about the perfect world. Like if you had a magic wand, like where would you see this essentially industry and the data product building headed?
Oh,
Well,
geez, a magic wand. Go ahead, John. You take that one first.
thanks. I mean, I guess, in what context would I like to wave the magic wand and do it? I think it's like, for me, there does seem to be almost like an ongoing debate amongst data professionals about whether or not, you know, we are getting that value from our data or not. So part of my magic wand would be able to finally settle that debate, make sure that everybody realizes that actually a well-built, well-thought-out data platform has immense value to any business in terms of You know, the strategic advantage in terms of it's going to give you, if you've got the data at your fingertips, and the empowerment of your people to be able to then do their jobs better because they've got that data available to them, and are able to interact and interpret it on a, you know, in an intuitive way. I think sort of lowering the barriers for the business to get the most out of the data would be where I'd like to get to. And I think that's what data products is there to do. I think it's there to sort of, you know, make it life easier for the business. It's just making sure that everyone's convinced of that, I think.
That is a really good point, because I think, and it goes kind of back to the understanding the value, because we were talking to this fairly large, couple of $billion revenue industrial complex. You know, they do a lot of different businesses, and they just thought that, well, you know what, we put all these businesses together, let's just smoosh all of their data together into this massive data lake. Let's put an umbrella on top of it, and then we can just run a bunch of queries or use Gen AI or something to answer our questions. And that was kind of, to me, that was like, okay, you kind of jumped all the way to the end without doing any of the work. You know, so you figured out the answer is 42 without understanding exactly what the question is. Obviously, you know, we'll see a couple of years later what happened to their data initiatives, but yeah. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think my magic wand would probably be, you know, a perfect world where everyone's holding hands and understands the end-to-end process in terms of how raw data turns into insights. And I think part of that is because I think it lends itself to more investment in the infrastructure, more simplification of the data pipelines, and ensuring that you do have that strong foundation in place so that you can take advantage of the data, and, like Johnny said, be able to get the value of it. I think beyond that as well, and not just creating the data products, but starting to be less reactive and more proactive in terms of how do we drive innovation. And, you know, people don't, I mean, maybe some people do, but I like to think people don't go to work just to, you know, slam hands on keyboards all day and try to, you know, use a tool and pull down metrics and fill out a spreadsheet. I like to think as humans, we like to be a little bit more creative in terms of how we can use different tools. And I think the ability to, you know, once you have a strong data foundation in place, and once you have a common understanding between business teams and IT teams, that's when innovation can really happen. You can start thinking through, you know, how can we take it to the next level and be able to create new data products or new use cases to be able to drive revenue or increase efficiencies in the business.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really hope that AI could help us remove a lot of the grunt work, so to speak, from the processes, the boring stuff, so that we could really elevate and do the more intellectually stimulating tasks. So, Hannu, what do you think about magic wands, you know?
Yeah, it relates to intellectually stimulating tasks. So we knowledge workers, and I mean any knowledge worker, we usually are quite smart people, and we are logical thinkers and so on. So if I have a magic wand, so it would mean that any knowledge worker, whatever they are working on, whether it is a small problem or a large problem, whether you are dealing with something, you are in charge of customer care and you just want to make it a little bit faster, or if you are the CEO in charge of the whole organization, you are a logical thinker, you know how to approach your problem. So if I have a magic wand, we would have an AI assistant who would help you to structure your problem. It would help you to structure your problem and address in a piecemeal manner that you would be able to structure it and eventually solve it with data.
Yeah, that's true. If you guys ever have some extra minutes that you want to kill, go check on YouTube the old Apple ad on Knowledge Navigator. It is quite fascinating. We're not quite there yet, but hopefully soon. But we're practically out of time now, so we could have kept probably going for another hour. But thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Andrew and Hannu. And we'll definitely get together again on maybe we'll just narrow the scope a little bit, so we'll focus on a subset of building the data products and focus on figuring out how we can help people just collectively do things better and try to eliminate that 80%. you know, maybe if that becomes 8%, you know, collectively will generate a lot more value for the humanity and for the companies we serve.